Speaker view, there we go. Thanks for joining me for tonight's tasting, along with some of the cast of characters from Kensington Wine Market. As probably a few of you guys know, the whole point of this came about, sort of time creeps up on you, as it were, and it's fast approaching my 20th anniversary in the industry and at Kensington Wine Market. And I'm actually, even though I have a giant ego and have no problem with self-promotion, I actually have to say that I believe this was Kurt's idea, this tasting. And I'm glad he mentioned it because it's kind of fun. I am going to try to share some photos as we go along from the journey, as it were, also many years ago, but you might have to bear with me a little bit while we do that. Really quickly, before we get too far along here, reminder, if you've got a whiskey calendar at the shop, probably a good idea to get it picked up because Whiskey Advent starts, it's next week. When does that start? It starts on Friday next week, so we're about 10 days away from that. We also have news for some of the tastings that are coming up. If you've got kits for the virtual SMWS tasting, they are available for pickup. We have also got, and here I'll share my screen. Oh, do not need Amazon Prime. Wrong button. Here we go. The SMWS, there are some spots left for that. They are open. There's one ticket left for the Bruichladdich tasting in store, and I did mention this. We are going to do a virtual version sometime in the new year. Ending with a bang. Those were poured yesterday. They're good to go. We are going to try to get Bowmore poured over the next couple of days. They were working on Ben Romick today before I left, so most of these tastings should be ready to go soon. And then sherry bombs, hopefully by Friday, Saturday, we should have this poured and ready to go as well. But you're not here to look at that tonight. You're here to look at some old photos and share some memories and drams. And tonight's tasting, one of the things that I really wanted to do was kind of use it as an opportunity to talk about you know, how I've got to where I am and the people who helped me get there, because as we all know, you don't do it alone. I only wish I'd had more time to prepare photos, and you know, there's boxes of photos at the shop that we almost never dig into, but nevertheless, it's going to be fun to go back and take a look at some of these things. And I only wish that some of the photos like this one, we're going to start here because I never went to Imperial, which is our first whiskey, but you'll get a sense. I mean, obviously everybody starts off a little younger than they end up, but this is on my first trip to Scotland in 2006 at the Arran distillery. Obviously no facial hair way back when. I might be able to zoom in on that a tiny bit more, but baby-faced and completely taken aback by everything I saw. I think Arran was the second distillery I ever visited. The third was Glen Scotia. And going from Auchentoshan and Arran, Auchentoshan, beautiful lowland distillery in Glasgow, to Arran, and then Glen Scotia was kind of crazy because the latter, as you can imagine, especially back in 2006, was not in particularly good shape. But I'm going to try to sprinkle a few of those little gems out as we go tonight. It looks like we've got most people in attendance. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed indeed, Sammy. Let's get rolling. No point in waiting around with our first dram, which is the Imperial 29-year-old. One of 4 casks of Imperial we were lucky to bottle from our friends at Elixir Distillers. This one, I think, even more so, like the other ones we had were all in the 22 to 25 range, I think, of age, just going from memory. This one was the oldest. It was the one we had the least of as well. But in a lot of ways, like, it was also the rock star of that range. And, you know, the reason we got this is because of the relationship that we have with Elixir Distillers, the people behind it, like Celine Tattoo, Chris Mabin, and Oliver Chilton. And I have no doubt that the only reason we actually got this Imperial is because of Celine, or Lily, as she likes to be called, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a long time because she's been in the industry for a while, including with the Scotch Malt Whisky Society and some other players as well. But I'm going to put that one up on the screen here because I think Evan is off tending to other things. So here you go. This is our first whiskey tonight. The Single Malts of Scotland Imperial 29-year KWM cask, 4561. Kurt, Sean, if you guys want to chime in here, I know this is one that we all were around for. I've tasted this one. My tasting notes on the site, but I kind of, want to hear what you guys think about this one. And this one is kind of one of those iconic landmark bottlings that we've had.
Sean?
Oh, right off the bat on the nose, like that, a slight, like almost like sour polish, like crushed up grist, and yeah, I don't know. That's maybe a little bit of yeastiness too.
There's quite a yeastiness, but it's so waxy and fruity on both the nose and the palate. Like it's just a style of whiskey we don't see very much of. And at the time, I think we were even shocked by how good a deal this was at the time, but it just didn't seem right, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, this one's awesome. So much fruit. Like I said, when I picked it up when we were in our little group before everybody came and joined us tonight, juicy fruit, lots of tropical kind of tones behind it, big orange fruits. Like Sean said, gristy, you get the cereal and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
These are some of the coolest things you've done over those years, man. When it's things like a closed distillery bottling, those are the things that make me kind of sentimental. And I think when you look back over time, a lot of people in this group are going to say the same thing. Like, you were able to bottle things that nobody else got access to. That's a man, a cask like this is a feather in the cap. That's all I have to say.
Mm-hmm. Well, and a lot of those things, again, didn't come about because, I think they came about through circumstance. They came about through unusual connections that, being a small shop, being the employee of someone who was running, a small independent wine shop, we didn't get the attention that other people, like say your Willow Parks, did when I first got started. I mean, Willow Park got first crack at almost everything from Diageo, Corby, William Grant's, you name it. Like they were top lists. So we went in a different direction, and part of it was out of curiosity. Part of it was out of opportunity because these were the brands, like Arran, like even Gordon MacPhail, that maybe were not getting the love and attention they should have gotten. And it just so happens that in the long run, some of those brands ended up becoming the rock stars that, we've been really fortunate to work with. Evan, I think you were around for all of our SMOS casks.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the Imperial here?
Yeah, it's Imperial as just on its own it's just crazy that we have gotten forecasts or did get forecasts of it is just bonkers. Mm-hmm. And it was like every time they sent us another one, it's just like, what? Like, what the hell is going on? What did we do to deserve this? It's the 29-year-old is just fantastic. Like it's got this greenness to it that I just absolutely love as well. It's crazily waxy and the tropical notes are just stunning. It's just such a really good comprehensive bottle.
Cool. Yeah, we've had a lot of great casks from them, and I know we talked about some of this, Evan, last year for the whiskey calendar where we had 4 different Imperials. We had a couple of Clynelish, including a 24-year-old. We had that insane Ben Nevis, that gooey, tropical, fruity Ben Nevis. We've been very lucky, and for me, I think a lot of it comes down to just the connections that are made, the friendships that come out of them, and then the business opportunities that arise from it. Like we don't have a Daft Mill in tonight's lineup, but like that purely came about because of interest and persistence. And, it wasn't because I thought that people would be geeking out on Daft Mill 12 years later, but I just genuinely wanted to see the distillery and understand what it was about. So was really lucky. Obviously the first person that gave me my break is Nancy Carton, who is the former owner of the shop, who gave me the opportunity to kind of chase down a dream I didn't know I had before I started working there, and took chances on me, like let me take risks buying casks, buying expensive bottles of Macallan that we weren't sure we would sell, that in the end sold really well. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride, to be quite honest. I can't believe it's been 20 years. Yeah, so that's the first one. Evan, I got a quick technical for you, and this is probably going to make some people laugh. I'm trying to connect my phone to my PC by USB, and I can't figure out how to find it. It's not showing up in my docs. If you have a magic trick on that, because I've got some
tried
photos
rebooting?
on. What's that?
Have you tried rebooting?
My PC?
Yeah, I'm joking. It should show up in USB in the lower right taskbar, if I remember correctly.
Lower right taskbar. What does USB even look like? How does one know what USB looks like?
It's like this weird black and white connect looking thing where it looks like a USB stick.
All right. Well, I'll keep looking for that, and I'll continue chatting in the meantime. I'm sure we'll get a lot of technical support through there, but we'll see what happens. USB. Okay. Any other thoughts on this one, guys? No.
Still waiting for that 5th cask.
Yeah, I don't think the 5th one is coming. I suspect they're fresh out of Imperials, but that's just a theory.
Yeah, now we just get small batches of whatever they release. Evan, were you there at the shop when we had the GNM 97 Imperial stacked near the front?
No, I wasn't there for that.
Those were the days.
Yeah, they sure were. All right, well, I have no idea how to find those things I put onto my phone, so maybe we'll get to them, maybe we won't. Yeah, a lot of the whiskeys that we have in the lineup tonight, maybe not specifically the brands, but the distilleries, in the case of places like Springbank, are ones that we had a strong relationship with, and we were very fortunate to have over the years. Now, obviously, we're not tasting these things in the order that things happened over time. Elixir Distillers has been a company we've been working with now for about 5 years, but before that, I knew of them, but we weren't really working all that closely. Other companies, though, it's a somewhat different story. Like Arran, which is, I believe, the next whiskey we're onto here. I've obviously been, working with Arran since 2006. Probably before that, I visited the distillery in 2006. I'm not entirely clear when our first cask was. I'd have to really do some digging to figure that out. But it would have been young, and it would have been early, or probably mid to late 2010s that we did that. The very first cask we ever bottled was a 1960 Strath Isla, which, if I figure out how to connect my phone, I'll share the photos. All right, I will try doing that. In the interim, Evan, do you want to put the info up on the screen for the Arran?
Yeah, sure.
We have a new Arran cask in the store right now, which we're going to do a tasting with early in December. And it's actually our 13th exclusive cask from Arran. It would actually be our 15th if we counted 2 bottlings we shared with a club. And unfortunately, is there a photo underneath? No, there's not a photo underneath, which is too bad. But I'm sure we can find that one on Whiskey Base if we really wanted to dig for a photo. We had some crazy casks from Arran, and Evan, I can't remember how many you were there for, but Sean, you would have been there for a good chunk of them, where we had, at one point, I think we had a 17, then we did 2 18s, 2 19s, 2 20s, and a 21 and a 22. And it was like, they were like back to back over the space of about 4 or 5 years. And I remember, in the early days when we were selecting casks, there would often be not enough that we were really excited about. There would often be ones that, we would reject all the samples because there was just nothing that we felt was good enough. And the reason we did this was because, again, in the early days, it wasn't my money. And I knew that if I bought something that big and it didn't sell, then Nancy wouldn't let me buy another one. So by necessity, they had to be good, and I had to know that they would sell. And some of the distilleries like Arran just got really good at screening casks before they sent them to us. And it got to the point where we were struggling to pick one, sometimes struggling to just pick two, because the cask samples they sent us were so good. And a big chunk of them were either 1996 or 1997 Arrans. And yeah, they were magic. And often we would have, and they were almost all sherry casks. And there would often be, if we did two, there would be one that was less sherried and one that was more sherried. And that was often the reason why we wanted both, was because that they ended up kind of being counterpoints to each other and playing off each other. Now, the reason we threw this into tonight's tasting, I mean, there's so many Arran casks, but just by pure luck, at some point in time, I tucked 2 bottles of this particular Arran cask away in my office with the intention of including it in a future tasting. And then I just forgot about them. And if I'm being totally honest, that's why we're sampling this, like 5-6 years later, because it just ended up in a corner of my office in a cabinet. And I kind of knew it was there, but I pretty much forgot that it was there. There are a few other things like that, and we may sprinkle some more of them out in a tasting next year at some point. But yeah, I was thrilled that we were able to do one of these older Arrans. It's been a number of years since we've had something of this age. And yeah, it's a lovely whiskey, and time has been kind to it in the bottle. Kurt, do you want to crack on this one first?
Yeah, there was a little bit of a friendly competition we had in the store for a while there. Evan and I sparred back and forth on a couple of Kalilas for a while. He put in a fair effort, but there was no contest in the end. With the Arrans, I actually kind of preferred our 21 year through most of the life of them. It was just a little bit sharper, a little bit more kind of naked, like maybe a more tired cask. As time went on though, and as this one sold out much quicker than the other one, I kind of regretted not putting several of these aside, because this is a really great whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
Can't win them all. Missed out. Should have got more.
Sean?
On the note of like talking him aside, I know I'm not the only person who thinks this, but I kind of like the old bottles better. So even just for that fact, to have those ones on the shelf is a little bit more attractive. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
Jordy.
yeah, I know. That was who came to mind, but I get it. I can't remember which I liked the better of these two. I think I liked this one a bit better, if I remember correctly, because I think the 22 was a bit more sherry driven. And although this definitely has a lot of it on the nose, it's much more delicate on the palate, a little bit more. There's still a little bit of like, winey leatheriness, but that raw fruity spirit just kind of it pokes up right through it. Andrew, when you're mentioning like, yeah, we had the 17, the 18, or I remember this one of the maybe the first 3 whiskeys I bought at the shop, I think, was one of our bourbon cask 15, maybe. I think it was a 15.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just it's kind of cool that we were able to follow along year over year as a store, getting casks and seeing how they evolved in a more intimate level like that. Looking back, it's something you can definitely appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even some of those younger casks, I think, showed really well. And, I think it was just fortunate. Arran was a distillery that no one was paying attention to. And, we were basically most of their sales in Canada were our shop. And accordingly, they gave us good casks, and they never said no when we asked for a cask, which was, we can't say of everybody. And obviously, sometimes people legitimately can't give you what you want, but they were always really awesome about that. So, Evan?
I wanted to jump on what Kurt said, because I really I've left all my time at Kensington Wine Market, but I get a chuckle about thinking about the battle between staff over which cask was better between a lot of the twin casks we got at the Arran and the Kalila from G&M that Kurt mentioned, or the Kalilas. But it was really cool that we got these twin casks over and over and over again, because it did give a little bit of something for everybody, which was really neat. And with Arran especially, it's been such a part of my own whiskey journey, where it seemed like they came into Alberta at the same time almost that I was getting into whiskey, and kind of mirrored their evolution with my own evolution in the whiskey world. And as Sean said, it was really neat to see the progression. Like, I know we were all really excited to see, I was very excited to see Arran get even to 10 years old, but then to see that progression from 14 to 18 and on to where they are at now has been really, really cool.
Well, and all three of you guys, and I know, you know, in some ways I should have planned some of this out better. Like, I probably should have made sure Marty was available for tonight's tasting, because, man, Marty's almost been at Kensington Wine Market as long as I have. I think he's been there 15 or 16 years now. But both in the case of Evan and Kurt, like, I knew you guys long before you came to work for the store. Had the pleasure of knowing you through whiskey for more than a decade now. And Sean, like, we were talking about this the other day, but you're what, 12 or 13 years now or something like that? He's got
I think we're on 12 now. I think
on 12 years. There you go. So, you know, as much as, you know, in a lot of ways, you guys have been around for a lot of these journeys and for a lot of these tastings and opportunities. And it's just awesome that, you know, I'm able to share this with you guys, because, you know, you were part of that. So, yeah, awesome. I have my phone hooked up. I'm almost able to share some things, and now I just have to figure out where they are on my phone.
Cool. Well, while you're looking at that, I just got to say, like, it has been really cool to see that, and to sort of have the democracy of selecting stuff that we're going to sell, which it's always been in my time there, where Hunter was involved, even though his thoughts on things were typically very crazy. And but Kurt's been involved, Harmony now, Sean, Marty, Sammy as well in tasting cask samples now. And it's always been really cool that it's been a democracy on that, except when it comes to actually getting our face on the bottle, which always comes down to you.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a couple of comments that could come up from that. But I mean, one of them is, you know, sometimes the casks that we picked were not always the ones that we liked the most personally, but they were the ones that we thought were going to have the broadest appeal, because, again, they needed to sell. And there are times where I know I've selected casks that weren't my favorite of the ones we had, but they were the ones that I knew people were going to like the most. And, you know, that's where this sometimes gets complicated. And I know maybe a little different being in the position of the guy who has to write the check at the end of the day is sometimes, and I don't think it's the case very often anymore, but especially like in the times when we were getting so many good samples of things, it would come down to like, what's going to sell. And yeah, Hunter was a fun one to bring in on those, because like his concept of what he liked and what would actually sell were often two very different things. But he had a fun flair and attitude. And even before Hunter, I mean, going back, we used to do tastings. We did a bunch of them that I called Whiskey Democracy, where customers could actually come to the tasting and we'd have 6 samples. And this is back in the days when businesses were way more generous with liquid. We'd have 6 to 7 full-size bottles of cask samples that I could pour a whole tasting out with, and then we were able to pick the one we wanted. Probably the best example of that, although that happened in Campbellton, was at Springbank, when I was there with a group of customers in 2007 or 8, and we picked the first 96 Springbank that we bottled. But there were a number of those Arran casks where they sent me 500 ml samples, and it was enough to do a tasting with them and have customers give me input. And again, I might not pick the one that everybody liked the most, but it was good feedback that helped me, I think, make good decisions over time. What are we on to next year? We're on to the Bruichladdich. There's there's been a lot of cool Bruichladdich bottlings that I've been around for. I've had the opportunity to take part in, and we've bottled, I think, 3 casks of Bruichladdich over the years. If I'm being honest, this is a bourbon cask, which I've always felt the best casks for Bruichladdich were ex-bourbon. Partly because, and I know this is going to come as a big surprise to everybody, I'm a bit of a wine cask skeptic. I really need to taste something to be confident that I'm going to like it, especially if it's a wine cask. But we did one, like, what was the one? It wasn't a Ratafia, it was like a
Rivasaltis.
Yeah, the Rivasaltis cask, which was it was interesting. It was, I mean, I thought it was good, but like, it was a challenging whiskey. And I think, it still sold out instantly, and it sold out instantly because that was at a point where people were just so hungry for Bruichladdich. They'd gone from having way too many products to Remy Cointreau bought them out, and then they didn't have enough products. And, I think this bourbon cask, which was probably was it the first one or was it the second one?
The second one.
It was the second one. This was an awesome cask. I think this is probably still the best Bruichladdich cask we've had yet. And that's not why it's in the lineup. It's in the lineup because I kept 2 bottles of it aside to do something with at some point, and this seemed like a perfect opportunity to put it into the tasting. Kurt, I want to start with you on this. Oh man, start with you on this one.
Yeah, it's my jam, but I think you're the same way as me. Soft spot for Bruichladdich. Good people in that distillate. I think there's a few of us in these circles that kind of go for those more challenging whiskeys that aren't just space side style fruit bombs. Bruichladdich got a really cool base spirit, a lot of cereal showing on it. This is a particularly great cask. We're lucky to have it, I think. But then, I don't know, Bruichladdich, even when they miss, they were still fun through all the years. I wish we still had the big ranges of Bruichladdich, right?
Well, I mean, I think that's what, one of the things that's sort of liberating about being, although we're maybe not as small as we used to be, but what was for the longest time liberating about being a shop that was not beholden to any of the big liquor companies is we got to really have fun with whiskey, and we got to dive into things that, other people wouldn't touch, and do it with an attitude that was open and honest. And, we could have these tastings and sample things that maybe sometimes we didn't like, and we could be honest about that. And yeah, Bruichladdich is a fun distillery for that, because I don't think that they would pretend that everything they do is golden, but they do a lot of interesting stuff. Sometimes it doesn't stick, sometimes it does. But I mean, this young Bruichladdich cask is what I love about Bruichladdich. It's funky, it's fruity. There's a nice little kiss from the oak there, and a little faint hint of peat, which wasn't expecting. I don't know where that's coming from, but it's just an awesome young Bruichladdich cask. This is why I love the Laddie Classics so much, because at a young age, naked and ex-bourbon, it's an awesome whiskey. Evan or Sean maybe?
When I couldn't remember this whiskey at all, honestly. Like, even back, like, I'm gonna admit that I'm a bit of a Laddie newbie. Like, I enjoy it, but I was never really like into it as much as like Kurt was. We're like, Andrew, you and I were there last October, and that was definitely, I would say, on Islay, that was the second best warehouse session we had by far.
And not just because Ruby didn't give 2 Fs about anything, but
No, it was just, it was like, it was the selection, it was the contrast. I like how they did it. That was also like probably one of the prettiest grounds to walk around on too, I found. But either way, this still has like that, a bit of that telltale funk and a little bit of that rindy note, but yeah, just like a ton of bursting fruit from underneath it. It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty
Okay.
excellent.
Yeah, it's a fantastic whiskey. It's actually reminding me of like older, like late teen SMWS Auchentoshan right now, where it's got this uh like candy floss plus like Twizzlers note to it, but then it gets the saltiness and a bit more creaminess coming through there from the Bruichladdich side of things.
Mhm.
I don't know if you
And
saw to Kevin Donde posted something to the effect of this is fantastic, only 2 or 3 in, and this would be like a home run whiskey in any other lineup. I tend to agree. These are banger casks for 10-year-olds or whatever.
Mhm. Now, maybe before we move on, since I've figured out how to share my phone, I might share a couple of quick images that I pulled up, and some of these might take a little longer than others, but and I apologize, I didn't have time to scan these in. I am likely going to do something, if not later this week, then next week, talking about some of my journey. But this is a picture from a Speyside trip I did, I believe 2011. And these are some Port Ellen casks we were sampling. Now, unbeknownst to us at the time, Douglas Lang, which was at that time run by 2 brothers, Fred and Stuart Lang, was in the probably early stages of what would become an acrimonious divorce into what is now Douglas Lang and Hunter Lang. And so this is in the whiskey library at the old Douglas Lang office. And like we would go up there and they'd be like, what do you want to sample? And like you could literally say, I want to try a Banff from 1975, and they would go and find a sample of 1975 Banff and you could try it. We were there to pick our second cask of Port Ellen. I'd already done a cask of Port Ellen about 18 months earlier, and these guys were along with me to choose it. We did pick the cask, but something went awry thereafter, and we never ended up getting that cask of whiskey. But it was still a pretty awesome visit. And this was back in the days when I had my whiskey tour company. So I started the shop in 2003, was just a stock boy warehouse driver for the first year or so, eventually got into whiskey. And over time, the whiskey side of things grew. I went on to Scotland in 2006 for my first trip, and I loved it so much that I wanted to get back there. And the only way that I knew I was going to get back there on a regular basis was if I started taking people on tours, because my boss, she would reward me, but like she couldn't afford to send me to Scotland every year to visit distilleries. And we weren't playing with the kind of companies that would pay for me to go. So she supported me in this idea to start running whiskey tours, and I would do 3 to 6 weeks of tours a year where I would take groups of people over and at different times, and I wouldn't lose my pay, which was very generous on her part. But also when I was there, I was hunting for products. And this whiskey that you see here, these photos on the bottom are from the warehouse at Glendronach, and there should be one more. These were taken the day that we sampled and ended up selecting the 1972 Cask 711 that was bottled for Kensington. And this is one of the most legendary casks we've ever bottled. I remember we were touring the warehouse with Alan McConaughey, who you see there with, in front of the cask in those 2 bottom photos. And knowing the guys I had with me in the group, I said, Alan, is there a cask in the warehouse that you go to, or that you would go to take a dram out of if you thought no one was looking? And he's like, yeah, come see this one. So we went over and he took out the bung and he poured out like 2 great big Glencairns full of this for my group. And the glasses started getting passed around, and I started looking at their faces and I started getting worried. And when the glass got to me, I knew I was in trouble, because I knew the guys and the gal who were on this trip were going to want me to get this cask for the shop. And we did. I'll be honest, we only took 300 bottles, which I regret, but at the time it wasn't my money. And this was already 300 bottles that were going to sell for $440, which at the time was not an insignificant amount of money, even for an older whiskey. But we did it. It was an incredible cask. And I know that it's probably one of the casks that the store is known for internationally, because somehow bottles have gotten around. I see occasionally on Instagram, this guy, Nate Ganna, who's got a lot of followers, keeps posting photos of him sharing that whiskey with people all over the world, which is crazy. But yeah, it was an incredible cask that I was really thrilled that we bottled, but also I was thrilled that I was far enough into my career at that point that I actually had enough money to tuck aside a few bottles so that I would have some for the future, one of which got killed on my stag night in town. I think I would say it was put to good use that night. Anyway, we're on to whiskey number 4. This is not a Kensington cask. Sorry, what was that, Kurt?
I have pictures if you still want to show pictures.
Yeah, we don't need to see photos of that night. I will say that my early self-destruction that evening was probably a blessing in disguise. My wife now, my now lovely wife, would probably not agree with that, because she received me before the sun was down, I would add. This was the middle of summer. Not in great shape, but what are you going to do? Evan, do you want to share the next one? This is one of the few whiskeys in the lineup tonight that is actually still available. And I wanted to put this into the lineup because for a bunch of reasons. First of all, Springbank is a distillery that I've got such a long, incredible history with. We were, for the longest time, the only Springbank embassy in Canada, or in the world, sorry, with the Springbank Society. And that came about really because, of persistence, but also getting to know the guys at Springbank, building my relationship with them, and, having them be incredibly supportive of me as a business. We were lucky. We bottled 2 gorgeous casks of Springbank over the years. And so that's partly why I wanted to put this in. But unfortunately, Springbank is so hard to come by these days. And originally, I'd planned to put a Springbank Society bottling in because by chance I had 2 left kicking around in my office. But I didn't put that in because about a week before we poured the tasting, a Springbank Society member who didn't get the original email for the offering sent me a note asking if he could still get a bottle. And I wanted to make sure that he got a bottle because he hadn't had one. So we shifted gears, we put this in. But this to me is kind of a kill 2 birds with 1 stone whiskey, because it also gives me a chance to talk about the Boutique Whiskey Company. We've been doing a lot of work with Boutique for about the last 4 years now. And some of that goes back to my relationship with Sam Simmons, knowing Sam for the better part of 15 years, especially in his role as the global brand ambassador for Balvenie. And I really like working with their whiskeys. And, it's a struggle because I know a lot of people just can't handle the bottles. They can't handle the 500 ml bottles, or maybe it's the labels that kill them. And I really think it's a shame, because you're missing out on incredible whiskeys by being bullheaded about the bottles and the labels, because there are some absolutely gorgeous whiskeys in there. Some of those blends like the Cutler and Stubbs, some of the single malts we've had like Glengarry, Bruichladdich, Bunnahabhain have been absolutely stunning. That 42-year-old Glentalkers is right up there too. Souptown, which I know some people are huge fans of, others not so much. But I've really liked working both with Boutique, and I love their sense of humor. I mean, we've got a new Boutique bottling in the shop right now that I think is underrated, and maybe I'll share something on that in a second. But this is kind of a funky Springbank. Like, how often do you get to put 23-year-old Springbank in a tasting these days? Matured in ex-bourbon and then finished in sherry and Madeira. I know this is not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but I actually think this is a cool bottling of Springbank, and I like it. So I'm going to go in reverse order this time. Evan, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think this is my first time trying it, and this is definitely rose tinted glasses. I think I did have a bottling of what might have been the second Springbank you had, which was was it a 97? Is that
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah. No, they were
And
both 96. There was
pardon me.
the first one was an Oloroso sherry cask, and the second was a Manzanilla.
So
It
I
was
think it was the
probably
Manzanilla I had, and it was like big and bold and chewy and spicy. And this is like a much, much softer version of that in a cool manner.
Mhm.
Like it's so leathery. It's got the dried fruits and dates, but it's got this nice sort of Campbelltown bitterness to it as well.
I know one of the guys who would have been on the tasting tonight, who's not here tonight, Jeff Serja, who unfortunately was a little under the weather. He sent me a note earlier today. He's a great detail and fact guy, and like he's the kind of guy who would catch this. But one of the old gents that I used to come on trips with me and was a staple in my tastings, Al Edgeworth, was with me at Springbank when we picked the Oloroso, and the Manzanilla cask was our second favorite. And a year later, when we bottled our second Springbank cask, or a year and a half later, and it ended up being the Manzanilla, and they'd sent us a whole new parcel of samples. Al like emailed me the next day and he's like, you realize that the Manzanilla was our second favorite. It was the same cask, same vintage, same cask number. It was our second favorite when we picked the prior cask a year and a half earlier, which was kind of cool. So yeah, I can see where you're going with it. That Manzanilla gives it kind of a tangy zing into the sherry. And I think in this case, that's the Madeira notes creeping through. But Sean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, everything that Evan was mentioning, but I guess with the Madeira too, I'm wondering, I'm not sure if this is what's responsible for it, or if it's just Springbank proper, but that we don't get a lot of Madeira cask influence on a lot of whiskeys. I'm really enjoying this, like almost like a carrot juice, like gardeny kind of note on it that I'm.
Love that.
Some
It's
days I
like the
might
root
not be into
vegetables.
it.
It's
Yeah,
like the
kind of.
root
Yeah.
vegetables
Yeah.
in like a roast, in a big roasting pan.
Yeah, I'm really yeah, and maybe with like they're like maybe like using like a wine reduction or whatever to cook it in or something. It's pretty excellent. I don't think I've tried this one before, and maybe I, you know, poo-pooed it in the past just because it's maybe the price or whatever, but I don't know. It's actually pretty wicked. I also want to point out, I think Alan is in on the call here too.
Is Al Edgeworth on this call tonight? I hope so. Well, if he is, Al, thanks for joining us. I mean, yeah, I just did a quick scan. Maybe he was and he lost his connection or
Oh,
something, but if he is there.
it says that use Alan Edgeworth is
Oh, and there you go. Well,
is
that's gotta be him. Great guy. And you know, I started talking about this with Nancy, but maybe, well, I'll put a pin in this thought for a quick second, Kurt, and let you chime in on this, because you're the one that I think is the most likely to maybe not be as thrilled with this as everyone else.
I like this one. It's kind of soupy, kind of dumpy. Those root veg notes you get, I kind of get a little bit of celery salt on there. And it's quite chocolatey on the nose with those figgy, sort of almost into tropical tones. Cool whiskey. It's not my favorite Springbank, but I actually do like this. It's just a heavier kind of version of it.
Yeah, it's a funky Springbank. I think the fact that, you know, Springbank being such a big spirit, you know, and I mean, already has those kind of musty, that Campbellton funk element coming through, is going to stand up to this. And I think this is a parcel that was in Madeira and sherry, and I think I got this where I got this wrong. It was then finished in fresh bourbon, because this was part of their American release. At best, we've got 4 or 5 bottles of this left. You know, yeah, the price is a bit crazy, but when do you get mature Springbank anymore, other than from a lottery or somebody on Facebook you don't know who just happened to get a bottle but is selling it at a premium because they can't? I mean, that's what's that?
Everybody goes batch crazy for Springbank, of course. I know you've got a long history with these guys, and I know you've like built something bigger than just, oh, we sell your stuff with them.
Mm-hmm.
Out of all the visits, out of all the things you've done with them, what's your favorite Springbank story for all the geeks here?
Oh yeah, Kurt, I'm glad you asked that, because it's a good one. Before I mention it, I'm just going to I want to quickly address Rakesh's question. Why 500 mil? These guys did 500 mil because that meant that more people could get some of their whiskey. Because a lot of the times they'd have a cask that only had 200 or 300 standard bottles in it, and that cask has to cover the entire globe, markets around the world. That's why. And yeah, the funny labels, personally, I love them. I mean, I think that's why people love, the Whiskey Agency and now Whiskey Sponge, because they're just cool. And they're different and they're not stodgy. And I don't know, maybe that makes some of them less collectible, but if that's the case, then it just saves more for the rest of us, is kind of how I look at it. My favorite Springbank story, Kurt, I'm glad you mentioned this, because this all goes back to my naive first visit to Scotland in 2006. I was being shown around the distillery by Kate Wright. Some of you might know, she was with Glenfarclas after Springbank for quite a while. She moved there because she got married to Mark Wright, who then proceeded to move back to Campbellton to work for Cadenheads. They had kids, and then Mark left Cadenheads, and now they have their own company called Watt Whiskey, which sadly we don't get any of over here. But the two of them are a riot. They're great folk. Kate was showing me around Springbank, and I'd only been to Arran and Auchentoshan before this. So this is my first trip to Scotland. They're the only distilleries I'd seen. And at this point in time in 2006, Springbank was not as pretty as it looks today. Like, Kurt's been there a lot over the last decade. Even in the last decade, it's been continuously polished up. It still looks traditional and old, but they keep polishing it a little bit and making it a little cleaner and nicer. When I first went there in 2006, they were not getting very many visitors. Frankly, they were getting hardly any. And it was dirty. It was run down. The equipment was seemed like it would fall apart. And we were in this room above the mill called where the malt dresser is. And it's this old wooden contraption that's still there that looks like something of Mice and Men. And there's cobwebs and dirt and mold and spilled barley and mouse droppings. And I said to Kate, all naive, because I'd only been to Auchentoshan and Arran previously, I said, Kate, I can't help but notice it's a little dirty in here. Aren't you worried about the mice? And she looked at me like I was an idiot and said, fuck no. As long as we have mice, we know we don't have rats. Apparently, if you don't have mice, the rats are eating the mice, and that's when you have a real problem. And there's something incredible about that logic. In some ways, it sums up how I've always felt about Springbank. They're operating in a different century, and not even the 20th century. They're operating in the 19th century. And there is something both endearing and incredibly frustrating about that at the same time. And I think it also explains why they don't, they make a quarter as much whiskey as Kilchoman. Think about that for a moment. They make about a quarter of as much whiskey as Kilchoman. But I love them. They're great. They're great. They're all great people there. Absolutely lovely, lovely people. Glenfarclas town, let's go to Glenfarclas next. I don't even remember which 15. Is this the one with just our logo on it? Evan will figure that out. For right now, all we know is it's just it's a Glenfarclas 15-year KWM cask strength. Number 2. Oh, it is number 2. This is the I'm sure it'll be up on screen. This is the Ferg in front of the store bottling, I think. Glenfarclas, to their credit, has, and I got their t-shirt on tonight, always been rather supportive of my silly ideas. When we did our first cask strength 25-year-old for our 25th anniversary, we just put our logo on it. It looked cool. I was happy with it. And it sold so well, I wanted to do another. And the reason we were doing a cask strength bottling rather than a single cask is we would have had to do a Glenfarclas family cask. And especially for those younger whiskeys, the price just doesn't work. And these 15-year-old cask strengths, we would get something comparably priced to the 15, but at cask strength. And these were big hits. These are with one other exception, these Glenfarclas are the only time we've ever bottled a whiskey without sampling it first. And I have to say, we've done this now 7 times, I think, with Glenfarclas, and they've all paid off. They've all been good. None of them have been disappointing. Some have been different, maybe not what we were initially expecting. Like our first 21-year-old was so spirit driven and so delicate, and so unlike the rest of the Glenfarclas that, you know, in some ways that was what was kind of cool and exciting about it. But this whole one came about when we did our first 15. They asked us what we wanted on the label, and I think I wrote back, oh, I thought we could just put our logo on the label. And I think the girl's name was Lucy. Lucy wrote me back and said, you can put whatever you want on the label as long as it says Glenfarclas and George gives me the okay. And that was a pretty broad theater to create something. And I was like, well, you got to give me some ideas. And the whiskey they sent me, and I know I've told this story, many of you probably heard it, with the Ferg and the Spey, the Ferd and the Spey, which was the Ford car bobbing in the Spey River because this guy had gone to Glenfarclas, somehow drove his car into the river, probably after hanging out with George, and did a bottling to commemorate it. Well, that gave me the idea for the Ferg and the Spey, which was the first one. And then I saw this shop, Robbie's Drams in Ayrshire, did a bottling of Glenfarclas with their storefront on it. And I thought our storefront looks cooler, so we did Ferg in front of the store. And then this whole series kind of took on a life of its own until it reached its natural conclusion with the last one. And they told us that I couldn't put my face on the ball anymore, which is fine. I got 5, I think, which is pretty good. Sean, why don't I start with you on this one? Because you've been around for all of the Glenfarclas cast strength bottlings from the 25th. Evan, were you there for the 25th anniversary as well?
I think all of us have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah.
Chad mentioned earlier, like Fig Newtons, and I was like, oh my gosh, like it takes me back. Like my mom used to buy, we didn't get a lot of cookies when I was young. We got Fig Newtons. And so like a freshly opened package of Fig Newtons was like, it's like one of those real, like, take me back kind of tones, man. Yeah. Really in spades.
Yeah.
But really, more like also like a lot of cherry juice and,
it's not the
I don't know.
dark sherry that I think people would probably be expecting for a Glenfarclas 15. It's a little bit lighter, but there's tons of spice, tons of candied fruit. Evan?
It's cool.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I feel like if I had, and I don't have the Glenfarclas regular 15 in front of me, but the regular 15 at 10% less is sharper than this one, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Kurt?
Sucker for Glenfarclas too. Let me know that. Great distillery. These ones never really wowed me when like we had them each come in. It was like, oh yeah, cool. They gave us a good one. Every time I've gone back to them, I think I've been overly hard on them the first time because we didn't get to pick it. I think I was kind of like sort of slightly biased about it. But every time I go back, I go, okay, they gave us good stuff. I wish I'd bought lots of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of regrets tonight.
Well, here's a funny one. While we're all on sherry, and we didn't put one of these in the lineup, but there was a time when I did play with Macallan, and there was that time that we opened a $6,000 bottle of Macallan 50-year-old for a tasting way back in 2007. Pulled this nugget out of a box that I've kept some of this stuff. At that time, I mean, this was unheard of, like $6,000 for a bottle of whiskey. No one had ever conceived of such a thing. And the CBC actually came into the shop, and I opened the bottle and sampled it on live radio, which was kind of cool the day of the tasting. We did back-to-back tastings with this one. And, you know, again, you can look at some of the cool things like those old school Bowmores on the shelf at that time. What's, you know, to me really cool about this is this tasting came about because in addition to having a very supportive boss, I had a community of people and customers that supported me in some of my craziest ideas, like opening a bottle of 50-year-old Macallan in a Lily crystal decanter. And, you know, Al's on here tonight. I know Jane, Rob and Kelly Carpenter are all coming to the in-store version of this tasting. But a lot of those people, Barry Flynn, Wojtek Manko, Don Tess, who were there from the very beginning, a lot of these people supported me through these events and spread the word. And, that at that time, Willow Park was like the center of the universe as far as whiskey sales were concerned. And they kind of helped build my following and the store's following. And then these things kind of took on a life of their own. Like we opened the Glenlivet 70-year-old when Gord MacPhail came out with that. We opened a lot of crazy bottlings. Sean, like how many tastings did we do with the Bowmore trilogy? Like, and not including Scotch on the Rockies. We did at least one in-store tasting with the Bowmore trilogy, and we cracked several black Bowmores over the years. There was a ton of insane tastings. We did a tasting with two 50-year-old Auchentoshes that was crazy. I've still got some of the decanters from some of these things. And the reason we were able to do it is because people were interested and they were engaged. And, we joke about this in recent years, but a lot of these tastings come about initially because I wanted to try things and I was curious about them. And, I was just lucky that there was other people that were curious that wanted to try them too. And on the Black Bowmore, maybe we'll end on that before we go on to the Kilchoman. But, Bowmore made me a keeper of the Quake because I personally sold more Black Bowmore than the United States did. And this is going back because they didn't understand what it was. And at that point in time, I'm like, this whiskey's crazy. Anybody who was into whiskey and had $4,000 to burn, I was like, you need a bottle of this. And I just wish I had $4,000 to burn at that time. I did not, but I did get to drink it a number of times. Kurt, you got to try those whiskeys too.
Yep, I did. And some of these people in this room heard this. When I mentioned that Bowmore in the Rockies tasting, it was priced beyond me back in those days. I was doing lots of events, but I didn't work for the store at the time, didn't work for Andrew, but he came back and my next pop into the shop, he'd actually pulled a sample of all of those ones they tried in that event for me. So I got to taste through all those old 64s and white, black, gold, everything, ridiculous whiskeys. So yeah, I've been pretty lucky, just like you, Andrew, who visited Black Bowmore many, many times. So there's a lot of people in the city that have one still, just saying.
No, I know that, but as much as I would dearly love one, I also can't justify the price. So
on that photo that you just posted, I just have to point out, like, your facial expression is just like, yeah, it's $6,000. I don't even care. I want nothing to do. Yeah, I don't care. It's like walking away from an explosion.
Yeah. Well, some of these things, there we did a few years later, we did a tasting with the 70-year-old Glenlivet. A lot of these things came about because we had both like customers, but also supportive partners and agents. And on the agent side, the guy who was there and has been there my entire career would be Andy Dunn from Gold Medal Marketing. Like Andy took a chance on me at a time because, there was a lot of times where he would catch flack because he gave me something exclusively that other people later realized they wanted. Rob White was one of the original guys too. He was the Bowmore rep at that time. He's been out of the industry for a number of years now. But then there's been a cast of characters over the years. Obviously the late Jay Wheelock was an incredible supporter of mine and gave me tons of opportunities as well. And then companies like Authentic, like Chart & Hobbs, Marie Gonville decided that I was going to be the Ardbeg embassy for Canada. We were the first one. We were the first Ardbeg embassy in North America. And it came about because people saw something that they liked. And, we were never the biggest. There was always other people that were willing to pay more, promise more. But we were lucky that there's companies that have been there and stuck with us over the years and given us opportunities like Gord MacPhail. The fact that, before he retired, Michael Urquhart made sure Richard Urquhart knew how important and how long-standing Kensington's relationship was with Gord MacPhail, and the fact that that company values that and doesn't forget it. I mean, those are things that I personally really take to heart, as much as I do with customers that are still coming to the store 20 years later, 32 years later, some of them, being loyal customers since before I even started there. Those things are what give us a lot of our strength, and, just incredibly grateful for it. Kilchoman, another one that have a really long-standing relationship with. I know I've been really lucky to have a good relationship with Anthony Wills. It's crazy to think, but I've been a fan of what they've been doing ever since 2006. Way back in 2006, I visited the distillery for the first time. They were only in operation for about a year at the time I visited them, but I was just really fascinated to see them. They were a brand new distillery. All the other distilleries on the island were well over 100 years of age. And I was just curious. And, the funny thing is I remember going in and visiting Anthony for the first time, and I don't want to say he was hostile, but I definitely didn't feel super welcome. I think I was probably somewhat of an inconvenience at the time because he was busy. He had lots of stuff on the go. But they had New Make Spirit. I bought a bottle of the New Make Spirit to take home with me because I wanted to try it. And, over the years, we've been there and we've been, supporting the distillery. We've done, I think, a dozen casks with Kilchoman. I'm pretty sure. And actually, the one we're trying was offered to us by Anthony specifically to mark my 20th anniversary. Now, it's obviously not 20 years of age, but it is a 2013 cask. So it's a 10-year-old. Kilchoman wasn't distilling back then. But if I remember correctly, this is our 12th cask of Kilchoman as a business, and 12th or 13th. And like Arran, they're a company that has continued to value the relationship we've had with them since the very start. I love 100% Islay. It's my favorite style of Kilchoman. I'm thrilled that they let us bottle. This is our second 10-year-old 100% Islay. It's from an ex-bourbon cask, 55.5%. And it's just a beautiful Islay whiskey. Sean, I don't think I've let you go first yet tonight. Why don't you go first? You've now been to Kilchoman. You've seen the place.
Funny enough, looking at the lineup, out of the 7 distilleries, we went to 5 of them last year, so that's pretty big percentage. What I mentioned,
one of them we couldn't visit because it doesn't exist anymore.
Fair, yeah. So 5 out of 6, pretty good. What was it? So I said Bruichladdich was the second favorite. Kilchoman was the first favorite on Islay for sure, and it was. I'm sure a large part is like a little smaller. You have such a relationship with them. That warehouse was fantastic. We got to, when you mentioned 100% Islay being the favorite, I mean, we tried some back to 2006. It was, and then we also did, I think, a 2010 and a 2014, I believe. And I think on that tour as well is where it kind of clicked for me, where it's oh, floor malting, that's a thing, and that's a real thing. And for the whole year now, I'm that's kind of what I've been obsessed with. And yeah, I don't know, this is, I think did you ask for a specific, did you ask for a really nice cask to commemorate, or?
Well, I just said, hey, Anthony, I want to do a bottling to commemorate my 20th anniversary, and you've been a good partner, and I was open to whatever they were willing to give us. And, I think I might have said 100% Islay is my favorite bottling, but I didn't specify that I wanted 100% Islay.
Well, I mean, either way, he picked a real banger. This is probably one of my favorite Kilchoman bottlings we've had in I gotta be honest, maybe I can't remember them all because there's just so many, but definitely one of my favorites in most recent memories.
Yeah. Kurt, you're an Islay fan.
A little bit. You beat me by a few years to these guys. It was 2010 when I went for the first time. It's cool watching that story grow and change. Evan's tasty note, bang on. I love that drier sheet note. Wouldn't have been the first one that came to my mind, but now I can't get it out of my mind now you mentioned it. Great note. There was a time when I would have been like, you're gonna give me a lower level peating of Kilchoman and expect me to be excited. But I've kind of come around to Andrew's way of thinking on this. I think Kilchoman really, really shines this way. I think their spirit is so dialed in that when the peat's dialed back a little bit, you get to see it much better. And just a little bit of a sneaker heads up for you guys. They are working on unpeated Kilchoman for the future too. So that'll be super exciting to see.
Evan?
Yeah, I think my favorite KWM casks of Kilchoman that I've had before this were the 210s that we had, the first 10 for our 25th anniversary, and then the first 10-year-old 100% Islay. And I think this one comes close. Kilchoman and ex-bourbon at that 10+ year range just is something else. It's such a cool thing to see, kind of like with Arran, where the distillate is so approachable at a young age that you almost wonder if it's going to age well or not. And then you see it hit double digits and it's just like, holy shit, it just keeps on getting better and better.
Yeah. And Kurt, it's funny you mentioned that, because I mean, for me, and I've been saying this for a while, I've always loved the 100% Islay. And I think I've loved it, like, and I love the real, like the full strength, heavily peated Kilchomans as well. But I think I like the nuance of the 100% Islay. And one of the things that I really especially love about it is the inconsistency. Like, and I think that's what, draws me also to distilleries like Springbank. I love the fact that because they're floor malting, there's variables they can't control as precisely as malts that are going through commercial maltsters. And, I think it's one of the reasons why I love Bowmore, and to a lesser extent Lafroig as well, and Highland Park, is because they all at least have a portion of their malt that goes through this process. And it means that it's not always the same. And I think it's most prevalent in Springbank, but I think the Kilchoman 100% Islay as well. Like, the peating level is not always the same. It comes across differently at different times, and that's what I like about it, is that it's different.
That's what Sean was suggesting earlier too, why he's kind of geeky on the floor malting aspect too. I think, we do buy into the hype they throw at us for great packaging and expensive products, everything like that. But I've made the point lots of times with customers, the people making this stuff are wearing Carhartts. Like, they're sweating, whether they're turning barley or working in a 28-degree still room. It's meant to be drunk, but don't just hoard a bottle, kind of thing. But I think it's cool when you see what the floor malting aspect, like you said, that inconsistency adds to the product. All of those distilleries that do that kind of stuff are held in ridiculously high esteem. That's just one of the common threads as to why.
One of the other photos I really wanted to share is the night we launched the 1960 Strath Islay at Kensington Wine Market, which, we've talked a lot about the cask tonight, but one of the things I didn't mention or haven't talked about yet, and some of you have heard the story, and some of you have even had a chance to sample the product, but the very first cask, and we've now bottled almost 160 casks of whiskey. The very first one was a 1960 Strath Islay, 46-year-old. And where is that image here? I just had it up a second ago. Oh, come on. I think I've got too many windows open. I got to close a couple things here so I can find it. All right. Share. Come on. Screen sharing has failed to start. Apparently the window is invalid. Well, that's unfortunate. I will figure out how to make that work. Yeah, first ever cask we ever bottled was this 1960 Strath Islay. Let me try this one more time. Here we go. So there you have it. This would have been in, I'm guessing, 2007. This is Michael Urquhart from Gordon MacPhail. Gordon MacPhail didn't do fancy bottle boxes. Like, we actually had this rosewood box with a glass front. We had it laser etched with the Kensington logo. They did put our logo on the back of the bottles. 58.2%. Like, think about that, 46 years of age, 58.2%. The liquid was dark as Coke. It actually threw a sediment on the glass. And I was nervous, like, how long it would take to sell those 179 bottles. It took 6 weeks. They were $550 at the time, which today sounds like an outrageous deal. But back then, I mean, this was like not an inexpensive bottle, but it was big sherry. It was, like, looking back now and having tried it, like, quite tropical. But it was just a cool whiskey. Incidentally, and this is a hot tip, if any of you are going to Scotland in the next year, there is only one tour you need to do. It is the Cairn, which is Gordon MacPhail's new distillery. And don't even think about the fact that the distillery is not yet 2 years old. It's cool, but the reason you're going there is Gordon MacPhail has crafted a range of whiskeys that are 12, 18, 25, 30, 57, and 70 years of age. And don't cheap out. Pay the £350 for the Voyager experience. You get a lunch with it, and you get to try the whole range up to the 70-year-old, and they are gorgeous. The 30-year-old was £300. It was without question the best buy in Scotland the last time I was there. And who knows if it's actually a blended malt. It tastes like 1960s Strath Isla. It is stunning. So do yourself a favor. Don't go to Macallan. Like, don't pay to go to Macallan. Just go to Macallan, walk around, have a look. If you do the tour, you're going to leave angry. Just go there, admire the architecture, leave before you get angry, and then go to the Cairn and drink outrageously old whiskey at a very reasonable price and admire the views of the Spey River. And your soul will be repaired, and you won't be angry at the whiskey industry anymore. But I digress. Where are we now? We're on to the Flaming Heart, right? Evan, you want to pop that up on screen? Do we even have any of this left?
Yeah, we should have about 6 bottles.
Okay. So the reason I wanted to put Compass Box in the lineup is, again, no secret here, I've been a big Compass Box fanboy for a long time. I love what they do. I think it's a company that's tried to retain its plucky counterculture sort of vibe while still growing, which is not an easy thing to do. I think they kind of, there's little ups and downs there. I mean, as a business owner, I know how hard it is at times to focus on things and keep the ship going in the direction you want it to go. But it's a company that I've admired for a long time, because it took a very different tact from the way the rest of the whiskey world was going, and it kept going in that direction regardless of what other people thought. And I think for that reason, it's why I'm such a fan of it. Obviously, we've been very lucky over the years to bottle our own blends. They did our 30th anniversary for us, 25th anniversary as well. The fact that this is a big chunk of this is Ardbeg is really cool. I've always admired the fact that they're true to their own vision and values, and maybe you don't like everything they bottle, but they do some incredible products. And what they're doing now with whiskeys, even like the Orchard House, I think is really incredible. Like, they're really changing some of the paradigms of the industry and, setting a benchmark. I mean, I think Compass Box did as much as anybody else to keep blends relevant in the last 20 years, and forced companies like Dewar's and even Johnny Walker to try to up their game to sort of catch up. And I think that's impressive. So John Glaser and Compass Box, I've been a huge fan of for a long time. I love the new Flaming Heart. I think you guys do too. I do have bottles of my 30th anniversary in reserve, and I know we've got, James Bourne, I saw was on here tonight, who's a great friend and supporter of the store as well, with Authentic. I wanted to put a compass box in here, but I couldn't put one of our increasingly few, 25th and 30th anniversary bottlings into the lineup, because those are earmarked for something in another 4 years or so. But I really wanted to have something from Compass Box in here, and I think this is a good representation. Evan, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I wasn't here when we did the or online for the Compass Box tasting that was most recent with I think it had 3 different versions of the Flaming Heart in it.
Mm-hmm.
I was a big fan of, was it the 20th anniversary release that they did of this? I can't recall, but I think this one might even top it. It's just so well put together. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Sean?
Evan, I think it was the 2015 you really loved. I think it was like that was a similar release to, or same time we got that, and this is not another luxury whiskey. And I like the luxury, you like the Flaming Heart, and similar to you, it was that and this one that I couldn't really decide what was my favorite. Obviously, the last that one was what was it? It was like 30-year-old Kalila, 20-year-old Clinleash for like half of it, I think. This was, I think, the first time they introduced Lafroig to it, which I just as well. It's kind of similar to like that, the No Name number 3, where it just adds something that I haven't quite had in Compass Box drams, which maybe it's not missing, but it was a step to the side to kind of move forward. And I really enjoy this one, and I know Kurt does too. But yeah, it's really it's an incredible one.
Kurt, you want to chime in?
He's a maestro. I know they'd opened this one on one of the days I wasn't in the shop, and as soon as I tasted it, I was like, oh boy, and grabbed 2 of them right away. One of them's gone already, sadly, but the other one I still have. I don't think I'm going to rush through that one either. It's a pretty whiskey. When you look at the components in this, it's not surprising it's as good as it is. And I'd recommend, if you haven't got one already, the last few bottles, like they said, grab them quick because they are awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Compass Box Flaming Heart for me was one that back in the day, I was a big proponent of and really pushed. And I remember at one point in time, one of the releases, probably around 2015, for me, what I loved about it was that it reminded me of young Port Ellens, which I've had a chance to try a few of over the years. And I remember telling John that, like, I thought that the Flaming Heart was his attempt to recreate Port Ellen. But that brings up Tobias and the Angel, which I still believe was his attempt to recreate Brora, where, you married old Kalila and old Clynelish, so you get waxy and smoky together. And who knew that all he had to do was buy a cask of Ben Romick from 2002 to achieve that benchmark. But it was a style that I really like. And, I like that their whiskeys are not just targeted to one demographic. They're creating whiskeys for blending. They're creating whiskeys for drinking. They're creating whiskeys that become collectible, but I think that's never really the intention. And not only that, they've given rise to one of the biggest marketing firms in whiskey. Like, by working with them, Stranger and Stranger has become one of the most important companies for packaging and label design. And that was because they did these crazy projects with John and Compass Box. Love the Flaming Heart. It's an awesome whiskey. I mean, I know there's things that I'm going to and people and things that I'm going to forget to mention tonight, because just there's been so many over the years. But one of the others I want to throw in here before we get too far is one of the little triumphs that kind of happened over time. And like a lot of these things, they happened somewhat by accident. They weren't by, a Machiavellian design but they were just by trying to stay ahead of the competition and spot opportunities before the next guy did. And one of those ones, and I'm just trying to pull up the images here, relates to the whiskey that was bottled to commemorate the whiskey found under Shackleton's hut in Antarctica. It just so happened at the time that trying to stay on top of the news for whiskey, trying to stay on top of what was happening, I kind of got a sense that this thing might be good or interesting before anyone else. And at this point in time, like even mid-size agencies, if you asked for 10 cases of an obscure whiskey and asked for it exclusively, they'd be like, yeah, sure, no problem. Because they knew they wouldn't have to sell it. And if I told them I was going to take something, we would take it and people would be thrilled. Well, I got the sense that the Shackleton thing, that there might be some, momentum to it. So when the first release came out, I sent an email to Authentic at the time. There's a guy named Trevor who was in charge of Alberta. And I said, hey, do you think you can get me 10 cases of this as an exclusive? And it was like a blend in a portfolio where they were trying to sell Dalmore Endurance. He was like, sure, no problem. And within a week, I started telling people that I had this Shackleton blend coming, the first edition, the one that actually had a small amount of Glenvar in it, which is the closed distillery that the original whiskey was built around, the one found under Shackleton's hut. The momentum started to pick up on this. And I think within a week, I was like, hey, Trevor, can you get me 20 cases of this? And he's like, sure, no problem. That rapidly ballooned to 50 cases, I think, before it shipped. And again, I don't think anybody in Alberta, any of my competitors had a sense of this before it came. And to celebrate the launch of it, we actually, we had a Shackleton expert come to the store and talk about his journey. We kind of did this whole fun thing around it and launched the whiskey. Long story short, I think we sold 1,400 bottles of it over the space of 2 years. And Trevor, the guy who was with Authentic at the time, was banned from Willow Park because they're like, you should have brought this to us. And he was like, I didn't even know what this was until he asked for it. And then he asked for 50 cases. And I mean, yeah, there was a lot of little fun things that happened like that, because again, the people that we were competing with in those early days had their eyes on what's Glenfiddich going to do next. We want to make sure we get as much of it as we can. And meanwhile, I'm off on the margins looking for things that are cool and unusual. And that Shackleton one was like such a cool experience and opportunity. And the fact that it made Willow Park that angry was just the cherry on top of everything. So that was one little nugget I want to share. The next one, the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. This one is doubly personal to me, partly because it's the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, which I've been a member of now since 2008, but also because the bottling is Bowmore, which might be I really am back and forth on this, but I think even though my palate might be somewhere else, Bowmore in my heart is still my favorite distillery in Scotland for so many reasons. And we had just an incredible parcel of Bowmores over the years. And at one point in time, we kept getting, and I think there was something like 10 or 12 different bottlings of them, but there was a parcel of Bowmore that was filled on the same day that would just keep cropping up in sherry casks over time. And sure, this is one of them. And I was kind of torn because I've only got a handful of these whiskeys. They were all filled on the 25th of September in 1997. They were all filled into refill sherry butts, but they were all so different from each other. This whiskey also like allows me to circle back and talk about Rob and Kelly, who were again strong supporters of mine in the early days. They were part of the companions of the Quake, the initial club in Calgary. When they brought the Scotch Malt Whisky Society to Canada, we were their first and only partner store for the first couple of years. And yeah, it was an amazing journey. And at that time, it was a really significant part of our business too. I mean, we've been a partner with the society now for 12 or 13 years. And these, Bowmores going back to the 1990s, like we had a real string of these. And Evan, I think it'd be wrong for me to let anyone but you start on this one. because you're now the Scotch Malt Whisky Society guy in the shop. But yeah, and I did see something about Lecheg in the chat there, but I kind of glossed over it.
Yeah, everybody glosses over LeCheg. Yeah, this is cool for me. This is not a bottle I've ever tried. It's got those really nice barbecue notes that sherry and Islay whiskey tend to bring out in each other. But it's still got that beautiful sort of light coastal seaweed note. Not as like crazily perfumed as I might have expected, but there's a hint of floral notes in the background there.
Mm-hmm. And something is up with my computer. I was going to share the whiskey base page for this, but I can't because for some reason
Oh,
my
I got it.
computer is typing digits. So if I click on anything, it's just going to put a whole bunch of so I can't do it. But yeah, there you go. I'll be honest, I had one other bottling. I think it was from the same parcel of Society bottles, and it was one of the Society bottles that I think had the best name ever. And it was another Bowmore called Baby-Faced Arsonist, which, I mean, you can read so much into just that descriptor. I think it was one of the best whiskey names the Society has ever had. But there were so many of these like really good 13 to 15-year-old sherry Bowmores from 97. And I remember a certain idea to reach out to 80 Rattray, who had one of their owners had owned Bowmore before, to see if we could get a sherry Bowmore, and we never got any. So we never ended up bottling one. But there's a diesel note on this. Sean?
I wonder if that's the camphor that they mentioned in the title. Yeah, I mean it, like on the nose, it's true to foam Bowmore through and through.
Mm-hmm.
Big sherry, I don't know. Even after like post 80s or whatever, there's like the floral tone is still there, and I always love it. I mean, you know.
Mm-hmm. Kurt, comments? Oh, Kurt's got a whole bunch of Society Bowmores.
Not only Society Bowmores, but those are all 25th September. That's all that same parcel. Yeah, Bowmore is pretty romantic. I don't know what to say. Go there, it's a special place. Feel like home right away. The distillery, the village. This Bowmore in particular, these old school sherry styles. If you've ever had the halls, the black currant halls, where they're kind of like this purpley fruit mixed with that medicinal thing, it's kind of the closest I can get to that. Then that saltwater kind of thing behind it all. But I think Andrew's helped drum up a lot of my romance for Bowmore, because I knew he was crazy passionate about it. I knew his story with Ian and the Keepers of the Quake and everything like that. And then opportunities just kind of came from him through Bowmore, as we mentioned about earlier, and stuff like that. And I think just visiting Islay as many times as I did and thinking back to those stories that I had there, the stories that Andrew told me about the place and the tastings that we've done, it's kind of skyrocketed up probably into my top 3 or 5 distilleries at this point. There's just a romance and a history there that's hard to forgo.
Yeah, I mean, things change. I think that's one of the sad realities of life. Like back in the day, like when it was Morrison Bowmore Distillers, that was a subsidiary of Suntory. You know, I had an incredible relationship with them, with Jamie McKenzie, Ian McCallum. You know, the night that I went to go to the Keepers of the Quake was, man, that was an incredible experience, because most of the people at that ceremony were just people from the drinks industry. They were executives, account executives, accountants for Diageo and Pernod Ricard. And, you know, most of them were barely touching their whiskey. And I was at the Morrison Bowmore table, and like we were expected, there was only 10 of us at the table, and like 2 of them weren't even drinking. We were expected to finish the bottles, and we had 4 bottles of whiskey put on our table that night. The only other table that kept toe to toe with us was, unsurprisingly, the signatory / Glenfarclas table, because those guys were legends in their own right, keeping up. But, over time, things changed. And, Suntory bought Beam, but out of fear of, I guess, Americans realizing that their biggest producer of whiskey was now owned by the Japanese, they put the Americans in charge. And that sort of relationship changed, which is sad. But at the same time, like, I still love Bowmore. I still love the distillery. I still love the whiskeys. I'm, like some people with sulfur being a bit easy on it, I'm probably on those sweet lavender notes than some people are. I don't love them all. I enjoy that as a part of a serve of Bowmore's, as much as I love the like goopy sherry Moors from the 60s and 70s. It's a distillery that for the first decade of my career was huge. Like we outsold the entire, at the time we were given as an exclusive, we couldn't do a cask, but they were doing a cask strength version of the Bowmore 15 for Sweden called Lamrig. And we were given the opportunity to take Lamrig on as a Canadian exclusive. We sold more Lamrig through Kensington Wine Market than the rest of the province did of Bowmore 15. And I know this because they told me that we had sold more Lamrig. And it happened that it was a great product. It kind of fit what I was looking for. And, the first Tempest, the first edition of Tempest, which was the best of those releases, was also a store exclusive because of that relationship. And, whether it's guys like that or, Glenfarclas with George Grant or Gord MacPhail Ben Romick with Michael Urquhart and Richard Urquhart, or, I could go on naming like people that I've been fortunate to work with over the years with different whiskey companies, Ashok at Amrut, Louisa and at Arran, John at Compass Box, Anthony Kilchoman, those relationships are what have allowed me to be where I am here today, where I somehow get to have a living and a life out of sharing cool drinks with people, which is pretty mind-blowing. This is definitely not how I envisioned my life going. Even when I started working at Kensington in 2003, I definitely didn't think that 20 years later, I'd be chatting with people all over Canada about Scotch. I mean, it's pretty awesome. Before I get all teary-eyed and whatnot, Evan, are we doing a poll? Do we have a poll? Are we
Yeah, I do have a poll lined up, and I said in the chat, I don't know if you saw it, but for contrast for your keepers thing there, you should tell the story about that you told us about the keepers dinner that you went to in New York, just for contrast.
Ooh. As much as I would, I don't know that I want that story on the record. Just because certain people may not look kindly on it. And even though there's probably only a faint hope, I do one day hope that I'll be made a master of the quake. Perhaps telling that story would not help with that. But I will say the night of the keeper's ceremony, we were staying, like, it's at Blair Castle, which is about a 40-minute drive or 45-minute drive from Glen Eagles, which is where we were spending the night. And I mean, it was an incredible day. One of the Morrison Bowmore guys, in fact, he was the head of Morrison Bowmore, was based in London. And he came up for the dinner, but he couldn't fly because he'd somehow punctured his lung. And this guy drove up 8 hours from London and then got pissed with us, like drank like a champion. This guy must have been late 50s. I mean, this is the old school whiskey industry, the way it used to. He said 4 or 5 bottles of whiskey put on the table. Between 5 of us, we drank those 5 bottles. We then proceeded to drink. Glenfarclas was having their 175th anniversary. They had that, the 2 versions of it, and the cheaper one was the one at the banquet. We drank another one of those on the way back to the hotel. I'm pretty sure I confronted Nick Morgan in the bar at the Glen Eagles Hotel about the fact that the price of Port Ellens and the fact that they were now in 6-packs was kind of unfair. Long story short, it was a complete runaway. And the next morning, Jamie was taking me to Glasgow to the Morrison Bowmore's blending lab, and I was going to get to spend the day in the Morrison Bowmore blending lab with Ian McCallum. And I was so hungover and like probably still drunk from the night before. And Ian was pouring me stuff from the 50s, and they all tasted like pain because we had gone so deep the night before. So I got to go to the Morrison Bowmore blending lab once, and from the night before, and it was the experience was a total waste. So that'll be the story to maybe end on for now. Guys, I don't know the poll we've got 25 of 36 there. Do we want to maybe talk about like your favorite whiskeys in this lineup? I haven't even thought about it yet, to be totally honest. Kurt, you're probably the most prepared of anyone, I'm guessing.
No, I just talk a lot. Top two?
Top two, top three, your call.
Okay. Number three, the Bruichladdich, probably would have sat higher for me. Again, if not for a couple other really big bangers in this range. Number two, our new Kilchoman, the Islay. I really love it. There's just something about that profile, that slight chlorine note and everything that's going on there is really, really cool. And then the Imperial. No brainer on that one.
Sean, you seem like your mind is set.
Yeah, I'm pretty much echoing Kurt on that one. Like that Imperial is really hard to beat. Yeah. Other than that, I don't know. Like for the second one, I'm actually kind of tied between that SMWS Bowmore and the Kilchoman. I love the Kilchoman quite a bit, but I don't know. We don't get as much good Bowmore as we used to. So this is a nice breath of fresh air in a way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Evan.
Yeah, I gotta pick the Imperial as my number one. Arran comes close stylistically. It's a little bit creamier, and I've got a soft spot for that distillery, so I'm gonna go for that for my number two. And I'm gonna pick the Glenfarclas for number three, just for kicks. How about you, man?
This is a really hard lineup for me to pick three favorite whiskeys from. I mean, everything in here, there was something kind of interesting and fun. But I mean, the one that's clear for sure is that Imperial. I mean, and it's kind of a tough, it's a tough act to follow. And we started the tasting with it. But I mean, there's a good reason for that. I mean, it's the lightest, the most delicate in the range in a lot of ways. That Society Bowmore shows really well, but I mean, I got to give a slight edge to both the Bruichladdich and the Kilchoman on that. So I think Kilchoman is my second favorite, and I still haven't figured out if I like the Bruichladdich or the Arran better, because I'm back and forth between those two. But yeah, this is just a fun lineup of whiskeys to do, to kind of cover a lot of ground and not a lot of time. One of the other photos, or I've got a couple of photos here that I wanted to share just to sort of wrap up, relates to when I bought the business. And there's a lot of good about that, and it was a great opportunity for me, and at like a difficult time in the city. And one of the things that's kind of cool about it, about the story, and it's I apologize, one of these photos is tilted the wrong way, but I'm going to share it anyway. A lot of you will know this already, but I bought the business the deal closed on April Fool's Day. And there was no grand or it wasn't that I thought it was funny. I wish I'd had the foresight to think of that. But it just like we were closing it at the end of them, and the first day of the month was the day the deal was done. And it was around this time, and it made the local version of the Herald / Financial Post. So there's the headline photo, and yeah, it's on the side. The guy who wrote it, David Parker, nice guy, kind of writes business. I would say like puff pieces would probably be the best way to describe them. They're like, he's one of those guys. He's like a man about town. He's really well connected, and so the article's there. But the interesting thing is this photo's right here, this page. On the page next to it are all the financials for the day. And this is when I bought the shop. I bought the shop when the stock markets were crashing. Western Canada Select was at $21.38, and only a couple of years away from hitting zero for a short while. And believe me, I was panicking a little bit because I bought the business like literally as the local economy was going into the tank. But it all worked out well in the end, and it worked out well in the end because I've got great customers, great employees, great partners, and that's how we got to where we are here. So Evan, favorites, tell us about what people thought of the range tonight. What were the standouts?
Yeah, so it looks like number one was Imperial. 13 of the 31 votes. Second place goes to a tie. Well, actually, just gets a sliver ahead. The SMWS 3.187, and then followed by the Bruichladdich 2007 KWM cask. Second favorite was the SMWS 3.187 again.
Yeah.
And the Kilchoman, followed by the Glenfarclas and Boutique Springbank, got a lot of second place votes as well.
Now, Evan, tell me about your third question in the poll. Because
Yeah, I was just looking at that, and unfortunately, it looks like you have to hover over the vote thing, at least on my screen, to get the whole write-up that I did there. I spent a lot of time on this today when I should have probably actually been doing work. But I put up a vote for what you wanted to see for your favorite future casts of Glenfarclas. I'll read them out, even though I'm getting over a cold here, so hopefully my voice doesn't break too much for you guys. So first place with most of the votes, 6 out of the 20 votes, was this Boutique Springbank blend KWM cask, a blend of 1960s Springbank local barley with 1970s Ardbeg, available in the standard Boutique 163 milliliter bottles. Label features Andrew astride 2 unicorns. Second place on that is what was my favorite, which is, well, actually, no. The second place on that was the G&M Connoisseur's Choice, the Cairn 9-year-old KWM cask, because it's impossible to get official bottlings from Cairn Distillery due to tight-fisted ownership. You can only go to indie bottlers for a fix. That's you got to know the industry to get that one, I guess.
Yeah, nice. Well, still they're quite funny. I note the Lecheg single malt MGP bourbon blend got a decent number of votes too. So
yeah, I guess there is some a fan base that does like both Lecheg and bourbon. It's not just me, so that's good to see.
Yeah. Well, awesome tasting. Was a fun lineup. It was cool to be able to go back and I'm grateful for you guys, but also everybody who took part in the tasting tonight, indulging me in this little walk down memory lane. We do have one new whiskey launching tomorrow, and it's another 20th anniversary of the Scotch Guy bottling. We were approached by Whiskey Sponge about 6 months ago to see if we were, and they sent us a couple of really cool samples. One of them, though, really stood out, and it's a cask of Craigellachie, and Evan's put it on the label. That's the label image, the label art. Now, initially, because Craigellachie uses worm tubs, I had this idea of the KWM whiskey in the worm tub as if it were a hot tub. And Angus was like, "Wait, how many whiskey team employees do you have?" And I was like, well, I don't know, like maybe 6. He's like, "That's way too many faces. I have to pay for each face." So then a new plan. How about just my dog Walter and I in the worm tub at Craigellachie? And that's how the label came about. And what I really like is that they got his wary look just right, because he's trusting of strangers, and his blue eye, and they gave him his own little glass with a bone in it. So what's not to love? It's a cool Craigellachie launching tomorrow, along with an Ardbeg limited edition and a Glenmorangie and a few other things. So check that out. That'll be in the newsletter tomorrow. thank you to everyone for taking part. Thanks for your comments. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to read on all of them, but I recognize almost every single name on the list. I'm really grateful for you guys spending a night with us, drinking drams. We might do this one more time sometime next year with a whole other range of whiskeys. But until then, thank you, Kurt, Sean, Evan, Harmony, who's not here tonight. Mark have been here, and Sammy as well. I've known Sammy for the better part of 15 years as well. For everybody, I hope you all have a great night, and yeah, we'll do this again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Take care.
Cheers.